going to solve number 9 on the 11.2 worksheet, solving square root equations. And so anytime you come to this and you see one square root sign, you're going to want to try to get everything else to the other side of the equal sign. So we're going to add 7 to both sides so that we get 6 equals the square root of 2 minus 17k. So that now that square root sign's by itself. So once we have the square root by itself, we're going to square that. The inverse operation for a square root is to square it so that those will cancel each other out. But if I square one side, I have to square the other side. So 6 squared gets me to 36. And then I don't have a square root sign on a square root on this side. So now you just have a couple steps left. Subtract 2 from both sides. Get 34 equals negative 17k. Divide both sides. You get k equals negative 2. And before I would box that in, I'd take it back up here to the original equation. We're going to check to make sure it's not an extraneous solution. So there might be no solution to this problem, and we found one algebraically that's extraneous, so let's check it. So we plug in negative 2 for k. So we have negative 1 equals negative 7 plus the square root of 2 plus 34, which is 36. Negative 1 equals negative 7 plus 6. Is that true? Negative 1 equals negative 1. So k does equal negative 2. Number 10, similar situation. Going to get a little more complicated, but we have square root function on one side, or square root on one side of this equation. So we want to get everything else to the other side. So we subtract 4, you get n minus 4. It's the square root of 5n minus 24. Now we're going to square this to get rid of the square root. But that means we have to square this entire side as one unit, not as individual pieces, n and negative 4. So we get n squared. Let me back up just a second. So n minus 4 squared is the same as n minus 4 times n minus 4. So when you're multiplying that out, you have to do n times n squared, minus 4 times n, minus 4 times n again, and then negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. Combine some like terms. Equal sign. N squared minus 8n plus 16 equals 5n minus 24. And when we have a quadratic, we're going to get all of the terms to one side. We'll subtract 5n and add the 24 so that we get 0 on one side. Negative 8n minus 5n is negative 13n, and then 16 plus 24 is plus 40 on this side. Now there's numerous ways to solve a quadratic. Pick and choose your poison. There's quadratic formula. You could try to factor it, complete the square, you could graph it. There's so many options. So if we were to try to factor it, we would need factors of 40 that add up to negative 13. And I know that that would be negative 8 and negative 5. Negative 8 times negative 5 is 40. Negative 8 minus 5 is negative 13. So I get two answers, n equals 8 and n equals 5. Because if I plug in a 5 there, it's going to become 0. If I plug in an 8 there, the whole thing will become 0. So the last step is just to check and see if those answers they work with the original equation. So does 8 equal 4 plus the square root of 5 times 8 minus 24. So that'd be 40 minus 24 is 16. So does 8 equal 4 plus 4? Sure does. So 8 is one of my solutions. And then let's try 5. 5 equal 4 plus square root of 5 times 4 minus 24. I see an uh-oh. 5 equal 4 plus the square root of negative 4. What's the square root of negative 4? We're going to have an, oh, it's 5. Whew, this should be a 5. I just got so excited about all the 4s we were doing. Okay. 5 times 5. Square root of 25 minus 24. So that's the square root of 1. What's the square root of 1? It's 1. So does 5 equal 4 plus 1? It sure does. So n equals 8 or n equals 5. Number 11. Alright, the square root's already by itself, so let's square it. If we square that side, we gotta square this side. So that will leave us with n squared equals negative 1 minus 2n. Because the square and the square root cancel each other out. Now I've got a squared term, so I'm going to try to get everything to the same side. Set it equal to 0. And then this one factors really easily, so let's do that. N plus 1 times n plus 1 equals 0. N times n gets you the n squared. N times 1 is 1n. 1 times n is the other of the two n's. And 1 times 1 is 1. It's a lot of dots. So then we set each of those factors equal to 0, and since they're the same, we're only going to come up with one answer of n equals negative 1. So the last step is to put it back in there for n. So that would be negative 1 equals the square root of negative 1 minus 2 times negative 1. Alright, well, we're dealing with the square root, and square roots are going to be positive unless we had indicated it with a negative sign here. So I'm pretty sure this one's going to be extraneous. Extraneous root. So that would be negative 1 plus 2. Does negative 1 equal the square root of 1? Well, the square root of 1 is 1, and negative 1 does not equal 1. So n does not equal negative 1. The actual answer is that there's no solution. Because our only option, we came up with an option for the solution, but it was an extraneous solution. So that's all we can do. Número 12. Do this one in español. Okay, similar situation to the last problem. We can square both sides right away because the square root's by itself. We get an x squared equals negative 40 plus 14x. Let's move that all to one side. Oh, these are just working out so nicely. Are there factors of 40 that will add up to 14? How's about negative 10 and negative 4? So you have x minus 10, x minus 4 equals 0. That gives us the two solutions of x equals 10 and x equals 4. But we're not done until we go back up and plug those in to make sure that they're both actual solutions to our problem. We get 10 equals the square root of negative 40 plus 14 times 10. 14 times 10 is 140, minus 40 is 100. So is the square root of 110? It sure is. So we know that that one's a solution. Now let's try the other one. We got 4 equals the square root of negative 40 plus 14 times 4. 14 times 4 is 56, minus 40 is 16. It should say equal. So does 4 equal the square root of 16? It sure does. So our answers 10 and 4. Harder problems, new video.